So it is my honor to introduce Brad Hill, Mr. Brad Hill, who is an equine vet who has over 10 years experience within the profession as a practicing clinician and having worked in different workplace settings. At Nottingham, Brad is currently at Nottingham, he sits within the mental health team, is a first aid instructor and equalities, diversity and inclusion champion. He is passionate about preparing graduates for practice, ensuring they feel capable and confident of bringing their whole selves to their chosen careers. And he is going to speak to us today about integrated mental health awareness teaching in the veterinary undergraduate curriculum. Thank you, Brad.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about the integrated mental health awareness teaching that we currently undertake at the University of Nottingham. It's a combined effort, so there's me, Kirsty, Georgie and Sabine within the team, and we put together the whole mental health teaching across the whole curriculum. So how did we put together the curriculum? So it's designed by us as a team. We're made up of mental health first aiders. We all have a strong interest in mental health. We have some, oops, just gone forward one. Sorry. So yeah, we all have lived experience. We have a coach on the team as well. That's Kirsty. And we put together the content based on student experiences and current research and literature. And we're always trying to update our teaching sessions so that we align with the most up-to-date research. We get feedback from each session from the students, which allows this continuous evolution of our materials. And hopefully we feel that we're laying the foundations for future careers and ultimately underpinning and supporting the well-being of all the students across all the years. Okay, so where did it all start? So it's an embedded module that now sits within the curriculum, and it started really with Sabine, who ran some Vet Society teaching talks outside of the normal day. And then these were built on with students, so co-created, including the vet coaches, which was set up again by Sabine right at the very beginning. And then as the rest of us joined in the last couple of years, we brought our own expertise and ideas. And a lot of that then was combined with some of the really good work that Liz Mossop had done about the transition into practice and how we should be preparing new graduates for life in the veterinary sector. And yeah, a quick big up to her Vet Set to Go program, which she started. Okay, so how does it look at the moment? So for those of you that don't know, the curriculum or the students at Nottingham are now split into a dual cohort. So we have 2 lots of every year running alongside each other. So currently we've got year 1 dual cohort, have a resilience session at the beginning of their year. And then later on, they get introduced to some mental health awareness teaching. And both of those sessions are peer facilitated. Then we've got the year 2, and they're also running along as a dual cohort. They also have the mental health awareness teaching. Year 3, as part of the dual cohort, is under development, and we're looking to put together some thriving in practice as a theme. So we're going to be talking about protected characteristics and the implications of those on mental health and mental health in the workplace. Year 4 is going to be the mental flex day, and I'll talk about that in more detail. And year 5 is resilience in clinical practice. And again, that's currently running, so I can talk more about that. Okay, so year 1 in the dual cohort. So just some more details about what's in that resilience session. If I could just have the next slide. So we talk about the transition into university because we know that that's a pinch point for students. The realities of veterinary practice. We try and build in the idea of having a flexible mindset. We look at some of the sources of advice and support, and we get that. We make sure that that's available to students very early on in the course so that they could be signposted to the mental health support that sits within the university. And we start to think about the stress bucket, and again, we picked that up later on. And Sabine and Georgia put together a first year game, which makes it really interactive. So this word cloud, which is a little bit blurred, and I apologize for that, just highlights some of the things that students struggle with in that first year. So we know that vet students get bombarded with a huge amount of content, and a lot of that can be quite overwhelming, as well as moving away from home, building up a tribe or peers that they feel comfortable with. And as you can see, those are kind of the common themes that have come across from that word cloud. So next slide. So students then go on later in that year to look at mental health awareness. So we start to then try and integrate some of this in so that students understand more broadly some of these mental health concepts. So challenges around anxiety and depression. We know that a lot of the students will have perfectionist tendencies. And some of the feedback from this session has been really positive about feeling less isolated, less vulnerable, sharing some experiences, and really kind of putting into context their own personal mental health into what might be going on around them. So clearly this student fed back on the feeling in lockdown and the benefit of actually supporting your own mental health. Next slide. So year 2 dual cohort. We then looked at, we then pick up further mental health awareness teaching in year 2. Just have the next slide. And this builds on some of the common mental health conditions. So we look at eating disorders and various other conditions. So again, we're just trying to make sure that students have a more broader understanding at this stage in the course. And some of the feedback here has been that actually learning tools to support others that are having mental health struggles is really important. So now they go from not only being able to be a little bit more aware of themselves, but perhaps understanding how they can provide some mental health support to their peers. And again, we always reiterate the point that there's signposting that we need to do if we're ever concerned about each other or our friend or their friendship groups. Okay, so year 3 is under construction. So we're going to put some of the protected characteristics in here and the implications on mental health. We're going to build on lots of the good work that's been done by BVA around creating a good workplace environment. So we are going to introduce some of the topics around microaggression, and again, just try and get students to discuss these in small groups. But yeah, this is yet to run. So if we move on to the next slide, year 4. So this is the mental flex day, which is a day that has run twice online for the final year students, just as they're about to start their clinical rotations. So we know that clinical rotations have been a struggle for students in terms of changing every 2 weeks. Their groups change, the environment changes, often they move around to different clinical associate practices. So the mental flex day was designed to give students an opportunity online to come together in small groups and talk to a facilitator and run through several tasks. So if I just have the next slide, I'll talk through that learning outcomes. So what we wanted to do with the mental flex day was actually take the students at this point in the course and set them up in a day where they could be fully present, let go of anything that might be weighing them down, so any baggage that they might have, so that they can bring their best selves to the workshop. And then what we did was we set up a series of tasks to get them to think about, one of which was creating a quality thinking environment. So we got students to think about an experience where they might have, for example, learned to swim or ride a bike, and how was that environment for them. So the whole learning experience in terms of who they were with, where they were, and how they felt during that learning experience, so that they could try and kind of reflect on that and then think about how they might set themselves up in future scenarios. We started to introduce this idea of the river of well-being, and to make sure that they felt that they could be adaptable and being able to operate under stretch. So again, at this stage in the course, we really felt it was important that the students really started to see this idea of being flexible, because we know that they're going to get to that point of transition into practice, and being in practice is all about being adaptable. We also get them to look at their own personal values, and this is something that I think it would be good to actually include all the way through the course, is just getting the students to write down, say, 4 or 5 personal values, and getting them to think about how they align to their career goals, because certainly we find that students often get lost in the course, lose their identity, and that makes them feel insecure, and they often then question why they're on the course, who are they, and where are they going. So aligning their values with their career choices is really important. And then finally, in the mental flex day, we talk about self-compassion, and getting them to really be careful when they knock themselves back. So thinking about the language that they use when they are perhaps berating themselves in their heads for being unable to maybe get a vein, or I don't know, be able to complete a suture pattern, or something really troubling that they are really hard on themselves. Get them to think about what they're actually saying, because often what they say in their heads they would never say to one of their friends. So we get them to think about self-compassion and think about reframing that. So moving from a fixed mindset into a growth mindset. And before I leave the mental flex day, I just want to mention Rachel Davis, who helped put that together from London. So she was instrumental in helping set this day up for us to run. So if we move on to the final year, so that mental flex day sits in year 4. So next slide. Okay, so before we get to the final year, I've just got a little bit of data, just highlighting how the students found that mental flex day, covering those themes. So it was interesting that although this data is fairly crude, because they've only got 44 students, they did actually rate themselves as being more resilient, having been through that day after the session. So it was just pleasing to see some of the feedback. And I think actually I've got some of the quotes. So next slide, please. So after that mental flex day, there was a real feeling of us all being in the same boat. So again, that's interesting how that theme follows all the way through the course. So as soon as we start opening up these honest conversations, students immediately feel at ease. They love the reframing strategies and thinking about how they could talk to themselves as they would to a good friend, rather than berating themselves. And again, thinking about support networks. So these are really, really important tools. And so it was really nice to feel that at the end of this day, they were starting to pick up these tools that we think are really important for practice. So next slide, and we've got the final year teaching. So I've set this up to run every 2 weeks in small groups for the final years. We've called it Resilience in Clinical Practice. So we now start to try and really think about some of the human factors about working in a veterinary team and in a veterinary environment. Next slide. So what are the learning outcomes for this? So this is an afternoon session for the final years with 2 facilitators. Normally we have 1 clinical and 1 non-clinical facilitator. So there's a really nice balance there. We like final year students to really think about some of the strengths and challenges that they've had in their 5-year program. So this book marks the end of their time at vet school, but not at the end of their time in their learning. So we think about how they react to stress, and we get them to share those experiences, whether they recognize the stress building up within them. We do actually get them to do a personality test, a DISC profile, so that we can get them to think about what personality type they are and how we need 1 of each to make a really functional team. And again, we set some scenarios up around that. So scenario is a dog coming in that's been hit by a car. How is the receptionist going to respond if they're perhaps a more perfectionist personality? How is the nurse going to help the vet if they're more of a dominant personality? So we get them to work in small groups and discuss that. We revisit self-compassion because I think that's so important. And then finally, we talk about resilience buckets. So again, this was mentioned early on in the course, but we come back to this and we'll discuss what tools students have in their buckets in order to be able to keep themselves at their optimum within that performance curve. And students will talk about some of their well-being goals, but also we get them to try and think about some of the strategies that they might employ in those high pressure, high stakes moments. And it's really rewarding that when we come on to this part of the session, students will talk about breathing exercises, grounding exercises. So they're very much aware of that. And we try and encourage them to identify these tools so that they can take them into practice. And apologies for being inept using the slides and going slightly over, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brad. That was really interesting to listen to and to find out what support is being offered to students at Nottingham, and I imagine going to inspire others to make sure that that's also available to other vet schools and indeed other universities and institutions where students are going through all of these changes. I think it can only be helpful. So thank you very much.